microphone
be
still
just as
work?
great.
They can hear me.
I think
Can
people
you
are
hear
here
me in the
for
back
that,
room?
so.
Yes? All good. Okay, great. Then we're not going to worry too much about technology. Okay, need it for the stream. Good, thanks. Oh, thank you. The clicker, great. Baby, baby. Yeah? My which? Oh, very good. Thank you. Perfect. Great. Thanks. Okay. Good. I feel like a rock star now. Great.
It's funny you should ask.
Was it in French? Good. That's great. L'illusion de la démocratie. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
The book was translated in French, and him posted.
Bingo. That's great. That's great. That's great. Well, it's read everywhere in America, so that's good. Yeah.
Congratulations, Ken.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. That's
Thank
great.
you. No, it's
Yeah.
phenomenal. As you know, publishing a book in France is so different. An academic book in France than the US. I didn't realize that.
Different universe, as far as I can tell.
Oh, like all those books is like, oh, just make sure you spend, leave open that month. I'm like, what are you talking about?
I know.
An academic book in the US is like an academic book.
I know,
Even
don't.
if they try to do trade,
Right.
but here it's like in a bookstore.
I know. It's.
So it's great, but it's so different.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this is why
Division of work. Division of work.
But this is why I come to France, right? Like, it's like people actually care here. It's really
Exactly.
great.
This is why we want to be in French.
That's what. Yeah. Why you want? This is why I want to be French. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's becoming sort of sad how badly I want to be French. I love it. Oh, good. You got the fan. you open?
So good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to see you in this hot afternoon, late afternoon. We are very pleased to welcome Fred Turner here, today at Sciences Po. Very pleased for many reasons. It has been a collective effort. So first, I would like to pay tribute to the organizers, especially Olivier Alexandre here. From the CNRS and the Center, le Centre Internet et Société, but also the GRIPIC, who also was involved in the organization of this event, and also the Media Lab and from Sciences Po, and also the McCourt Institute, which was also involved in the organization of this event. So very pleased, very happy to welcome you today, Fred. I would say that there are many reasons, but I was looking for the most important reason why it's so important to have you today at Sciences Po is just because Dominique Cardon, you know very well, has set up this. It was several years ago, a new course, a new teaching course, which was called Digital Culture, and it still is a mandatory class for every 2-year students at Sciences Po. And so in one of the first session, we pay great attention to history and of course your work, and especially your book from Counterculture to Cyberculture is very critical in this historical analysis, and maybe I shouldn't bet, but I'm pretty sure that Stephen Brunt is some kind of familiar figure for most Sciences Po students. So I let Olivier Alexandre do the introduction, and I wanted also to thank Amélie Vérel for the organizing also from Sciences Po. And also, of course, Jen Schredier for accepting to discuss your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvain. We are very glad to be welcomed by Sciences Po today. It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Jen, for accepting the invitation to discuss the work of Fred. Thank you, Amélie. Of course, we have a special thoughts for Dominique Cardon, and we do hope that he'll be with us soon again. So, Fred, I'm going to introduce you.
Okay.
This is not an easy task because you are a so special and rare bird. So for trying to put your life in a box, I would say that you've been journalist for almost 10 years. And now you're a distinguished professor at Stanford. And you have to know that Stanford is, of course, this very prestigious, wealthy, amazing academic institution that when we speak about hiring new professor, it's a kind of rare and big deal for this institution. You've grown up and have been trained through East Coast institutions. Mm-hmm. You spent time in Germany. Mm-hmm. You said that if, and I quote you, if resurrection was an option, you will want to born again in France.
It's true.
But
it's true, actually. Yeah.
But
I come back. I'm coming back here.
Still, you live in Mountain View.
I do.
Not far from the Googleplex.
Nope.
And your name is closely associated now with Silicon Valley, and maybe for a long time from now. Plus, you started your PhD at 35.
I did.
Wow.
Thank you.
35 at San Diego University, and you wanted to work on hippie communities. Mm-hmm. But your breakthrough happened with a very unexpected internet genealogy. Your first book was about the trauma of the Vietnam on US society through a kind of media analysis lens. And you thought that it will be a success. Yes, and your editor thought too.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. Then your second book was the publication of your PhD thesis. Right. And you thought that would go pretty confidential, and it wasn't either. Yeah. This twist in your career path and life path makes also the richness of your work, letting you producing a compelling story out of a complex, obscure, and very bizarre, I'd say, socio-technical topic, forcing tech to look back at its origins, enabling critical thinking in the heart of Silicon Valley, connecting dots between a lot of different disciplines like computer science, cultural history, anthropology, design, performing arts, with a common goal to show how technology are political. And it's a very common statement to say in social sciences, do not separate like virtual and real life, do not separate like political and social, do not separate like technology from politics. But it's a pretty rare thing to do it in our work. And from counterculture to cyberculture did it directly, to the point to be considered almost immediately as a classic, both in the US and in France. And I remember when it came out in France, I had this little game with myself. I was looking where the booksellers and the librarians put the book, actually. And the conclusion was they didn't know where to put it. Sometimes it was in the history section, sometimes it was in anthropology, sometimes it was in sociology, sometimes it was telecommunications or sciences. And even once the book was alone on the shelf. Poor book. So the same goes for the readers, actually, sometimes. They usually agree that it's a fascinating book, but it may come with some misunderstandings. This is true for students, and I've made the experience quite often. They can get lost in the reference maze that you propose to step into. This is true also for your academic readers, and once again, in an interview, you said that you noticed that while the book was well received in the US and in France, it was also widely misunderstood. And I quote you on that. And I think it's a very important point. Some people thought that you were explaining how the hippies had brought us the internet and personal computers. In fact, you were trying to say that the collaborative scientific culture of Cold War military research brought us the computer and the hippies, or what you call as, more precisely, new communalists. So I think it's your third visit in France. Right after the first one, just Netflix came out and put the total mess in our audiovisual system. The second time, the day after, I think, Donald Trump was elected. And this time, in the early moment when we were speaking, Elon Musk is welcomed by our French president, even if Twitter is turning to be quite an issue and a worrying issue for a lot of people. So one of the questions of the Q&A after your talk could be how far and how long that it will go. But one of the great interests of your work, to me, is to better understand what we experience as disenchantment about tech today was perhaps nothing more than a great misunderstanding since the beginning. Some misunderstandings die hard, and it's a pleasure to us and for us to have you tonight in Sciences Po, in Paris, for trying to clearing them up. So Fred, welcome.
Wow, thanks.
And the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Gosh. It's a little hot tonight. Do you mind if I? Yeah, thanks. Great. Oh, we'll go California style. So thank you, Olivier, and thank you, Sylvain. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. You know, the dream of every American scholar is to be thought to be a French intellectual. And my colleagues at home know that I'm in Paris, and they think I'm a French intellectual, and that's all I need in life. It's actually great. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here at this table with this group. I mean, imagine getting that introduction from Olivier, who is the author of La Tech, which is an incredible book. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend it. I want to thank the organizers. I also especially want to thank my brave French publishers, CNF Editions and Hervé Lecornier, there at the top, and Nicholas Taffen, who have been very generous in supporting my work all the way along. Okay, I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, I think. I get excited. When I get excited, I speak quickly. So it's totally fine to do this. Okay, really, it's really fine. Like, I will slow down, but I won't slow down if I don't know that I should. So please, seriously, if I'm going fast, you're not alone. And just do this. My own students do this, okay? All right, good. Okay, good. So, I'm going to clear out some chairs here because, as anyone who speaks publicly does, I get a little bit nervous, and it's just better if I can move around a little bit. Thank you. All right, so I'm super honored to be here on the 10th anniversary of the French publication of my book, The Sources of Digital Utopia. And I want to especially thank Hervé and the authors and editors at CNF Editions who have produced an evaluation of that book. I'm going to mispronounce the name in French, Retour de l'Utopie. Hervé, say it again, would you, for me? Retour de
Utopia Backlash.
Utopia Backlash, thank you. That's great. Retour de Utopia, yeah, I can't do it. Sorry, no French. Je suis désolé, je ne parle pas français, and that is all my French. But a beautiful collection. Some of the authors are here tonight. I'm really honored by the essays in that book that take up the counterculture book and argue with it in some interesting ways. I'm very honored. My goal today is to ask whatever became of the dreams of 1968, the dreams of 1998. And, you know, that's a big question. I'm going to start where we are, and then I'm going to try to break it down in two pieces. So let's just start with where we are. Can you all, yeah, God, we are trapped, or it feels like we are trapped in some kind of teenage hellscape, right? We have cell phones, we have digital technologies with us at all times. I had a croissant this morning at a table where everyone at the table except my wife and me took a picture of their croissant to put on Instagram. Like, what is up with that? We live in a world, though, it's not only that sort of individual side. We live in a world in which large corporations are mining our social lives, repurposing those social lives for profit, and polluting our social worlds while they do that. We live in a world in which AI threatens to take over our jobs, although I don't think that's going to happen. More on that soon. We live in a world in which political polarization is constant, and people blame the internet for it. How did we get here? How did we get to this horrible place? I don't know that I have the answers to that, but I will say that some of the seeds of the dystopian experience we are having now were sown in the 1960s and 70s in the utopian vision of the internet starting out. I'm going to make that argument. I'm also going to make an argument that, in a very American way, things are not as bad as they seem. Okay. So, today I'm going to talk through, I think, two moments in history and then ask a question. The first moment, I'm going to take you back to the 1960s, just because, first, it's really fun, and second, because I think it sets the stage for some of the places that we are now. Then I'm going to leap forward to our own moment and to the case of technology-enabled work, digital work at home, because I think that's a very good case with which to think about both the challenges of digital media and the opportunities. Okay, brief time check. Am I speaking at a good speed? Yes. Okay, great. Remember, really and truly, because as I go along, I will get more excited. Okay, thanks. All right, great. So at the end of the talk, then, I want to ask, where do we go from here? If some of the ideals of the counterculture are still with us, what can we do to take advantage of the benefits of those ideals without losing our souls? All right, so California. I'm from California. Some of you are old enough to remember rock and roll. I certainly do. So this is Richard Brautigan. Richard Brautigan was a poet in the 1960s in San Francisco. He roamed the streets of Haight-Ashbury, as did the Grateful Dead, as did Janis Joplin. The Rolling Stones were never there, you know, and he, pardon? Yeah, yep, so, so in 1967, he wrote a poem that is still very much with us. This is what it looked like. He handed this poem out in the streets of San Francisco in 1967. I think this poem, more than any one document, sets the stage for some of the dreams that animate technology today. And so I'm going to enjoy just reading it out loud for a moment. I like to think, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony, like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think right now, please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics, where deer stroll peacefully past computers, as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. If any of you have been to Burning Man, you know this is real. I like to think it has to be of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace. Oh. At the time, this poem contained a utopian vision. You know, imagine you're walking down the streets in San Francisco, high as a kite, and you read that. You're like, yeah. But it's kind of a childlike vision, and an interesting one. The question is, where did it come from? So you might think that it comes from too much LSD, but it didn't. The vision of a cybernetic utopia is at least 20 years older. It comes directly from the military-industrial research complex of American life, and particularly the work of Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener was the person who coined the term cybernetics. And Norbert Wiener's vision was a vision of technology-enabled democracy. In Wiener's vision, the entire world, natural, mechanical, social, was nothing but a series of intersecting information systems. And once we as people understood that we were nothing but information systems, we could begin to signal to one another our needs and our desires. And with the aid of technology, each individual could signal their needs and their desires in ways that others could recognize, and social order would emerge. We would no longer need the kind of state that produced World War II. We would no longer need bureaucracy. We would be free to live in a state of mutual programming. In the 1960s, people took the idea of mutual programming very literally. This is a nice example of two hippies dancing in relation to one another. There are beautiful videos, and you might have seen some of these in documentaries. There are beautiful videos of hippies mirroring each other in their dancing, literally mutually programming one another. Marriage was one of the things that was reimagined in cybernetic terms in this period. Husbands and wives were thought to program one another. Seriously. So it's a fascinating period. It's a period in which harmony, social harmony, emerges from mutual individual signaling. And it was very explicitly meant to be an alternative to fascism, and also very particularly to a fascist understanding of institutions and technologies. Now, this, of course, is a picture from Nuremberg, and I want you to see a couple things in it before I show you the next picture. First, obviously, hierarchy, rows, but also de-individualization. These are soldiers who have lost all their individuality. They are in rows. They are oriented toward a single leader, toward a single flag. And they are technologically equipped. They have helmets, weapons, and so forth. Well, they don't have weapons because it's an earlier era, but they have backpacks. This is what the counterculture proposed instead. Drawing on cybernetics, the communalist wing of the counterculture hoped to produce a world in which we would all live on a kind of imaginary prairie, taking technologies from mainstream industry and turning them into these kind of wonderful houses, these geodesic domes. And we would be free, finally, in these geodesic domes, to leave hierarchy, states, and fascism behind. Now, I would program you, you would program me, we would live in harmony. Yeah, so, okay. Well, it didn't work out that way. But it's a fascinating change. So that was, a lot of what I just described was the core of my counterculture book. The part I didn't talk about is at the end of the book when the counterculture meets and fuses with the new right in the 1990s. And I'm going to leave that off for now, though I'd be delighted to talk about it in Q&A. The main thing I want to flag now is that as we jump from that moment in the 1960s toward our own time, we go through three really dramatic technological changes. The first is miniaturization. In the 1940s, computers filled whole rooms. In the 1960s, they still filled whole rooms. It was only in the early 70s that we began to get desktop computers, and around 1980 that we began to get commercial laptops. And it wasn't really until the iPhone in the 2000s that we had portable computers in our pockets that were as powerful as what we carry now. We live in a period of constant miniaturization. And miniaturization, in turn, facilitates interconnection. Because interconnection isn't just about logging on a screen at a desktop or in a computer room. It's about texting your friends in real time, wherever you are. Now you're connected to one another wherever you are, whenever you want to be. Now, in the 60s, we imagined that that would happen in a neutral environment, an institutionally neutral environment. Cybernetics, in particular, fantasized a world in which you were information, we are all equal. All we have to do is circulate our information and order will emerge. But of course, we're not equal. And there have always been corporate players in the mix. And corporate players have an industrial incentive to do the third thing, which is to build platforms. So I would argue, let me just make sure this is on the slide. Yeah, good. So these three forces, miniaturization first, interconnection second, and then the build out of large platforms in different domains. So this is Facebook, this is Twitter, in search it's Google. These are usually second movers who dominate the whole space they're in. Okay. Now here's the paradox. The paradox is that between 1968 or so and 2023, we have seen on the one hand massive corporate consolidation, but on the other hand, massive individuation of media use. And this is a paradox. I use my phone probably a little differently than you do yours. We probably have different apps on it, determined partly by our region and our age, but also partly just by our personal interests. I really love to watch airplanes come in and know where they come from. You know, it's really great to be an academic in France. You can just confess things. So I have a special app on my phone that lets me identify planes as they fly overhead. Anybody else have that app on their phone? Yay! We can talk after. That's great. Oh, what fun. I'm so cheered. Thank you. That's great. There's two of us here today. Okay? But that's what I mean about the individuation of experience. How many people are carrying iPhones? How many? Yeah, right? Me too. But only two of us have that app. So we are massively integrated in terms of the iPhone universe, but we experience it very differently. And that's a feature of our time that I think is really sort of paradoxical. And it leaves us sort of weak in the face of central forces, and that's another thing we can get to at the end. It makes me very nervous. What I want to do now is jump toward our moment and toward the pandemic, and to argue that in fact, the pandemic brought to life at least one of the dreams of the counterculture. So in the 1960s, the counterculture of the commune world hoped that by leaving hierarchy, by leaving bureaucracy, by embracing technology, they could reintegrate the home world and the work world. You would no longer need to go to the factory and come home. Your house could be the factory. You could collaborate together with your friends. You wouldn't need hierarchy or industry. You could just work together at home. And on the communes, that was kind of a nightmare, actually. I've talked to a lot of people who lived on communes. I first wanted to write about communes because I had written a book about the Vietnam War, and I left that book so depressed. I thought there must have been something good in the 60s. What was it? I went to study communes, and I got depressed again. Has anyone here lived on a commune in the 60s? No? Okay. Sometimes if I ask that in California, the answer is yes. And when the answer is yes, eyes do this. Oh, yes. Because they were actually very conservative places. They were places there that replicated the racism, the gender politics of traditional suburban America. They were very white. They were upper and middle upper class. But they dreamed of going back and farming together and living in a way that lived at work at home and could be at work, home and work in the same place. Today, we actually start to experience something like that. And you can see here, I just grabbed a commercial image of a woman working at home while the kids are working over there, dad's on the phone. I bet this looks a little familiar to some of you who have children and survived the pandemic. Was it a happy thing? Yeah, okay, that's good. So you liked it. You loved it. Okay, cool. Why? Pardon? I was in the countryside. Yes, exactly. Yes, my friends who work at Starbucks hate you. Yeah. But yes, exactly. No, you're right. And the countryside was great, and being able to do these things together was great. I was happy because I was able to work. I mean, I'm always a professor, so I can always work at home a little bit. But I was able to spend more time at home with students who were all over the place, and also with my parents-in-law who are old and need some care, and I was able to care for them more easily. But it was also very challenging for people who had young kids, especially, that were not in school. Very, very challenging. What I want to say is that the pandemic opened a window on a legacy of the counterculture for technology that we need to keep open. And I want to break that down a little bit. Before the advent of portable computation, we lived through 250 years of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution brought us a world of centralized factories like the one you see here. And in a world of centralized factories, you bifurcate your life. You're home for some hours in the day, then you go to the factory. You have a home world and a work world. And in the Industrial Revolution, this had tremendous implications. First, for people at work, thank you, that was great. No, it's fine, it was nice, thank you, that was good, that was nice. It was like a little bath of sound. On the factory floor, your boss could watch you, you could get together with other workers. When you got home, if you were a man, in theory, you could put your feet up, because the woman would be doing all this work at home. The Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, brought us many of the gender divisions that we inhabit today. In America, the cult of domesticity, the idea that women should be at home and be special and fragile and take care of babies with their special fragile bodies, that idea is a 19th century, at least in the States, is a 19th century American idea. In fact, I have a lovely quotation from the 19th century. This is a woman named Sarah Hale, from 1832, and she writes in a magazine for ladies, "Our men are sufficiently money-making. Let us keep our women and children from the contagion as long as possible." So, in the industrial era, we inhabit a world in which there are centralized factories. The division between home and work is very strong. Also, the division between male roles and female roles is very strong. And by the middle of the 20th century, especially after Nazi fascism, there is a fear that that style has really gone wrong. In that period, industrial relations produced hierarchies of the kind that you see here on a contemporary factory floor. Industry has not gone away. It produced the suburbs in many ways. The suburbs in many ways are a product of the ability to centralize industry. First finance in central cities, but then later industrial regions that could be kept slightly outside the city. So you would end up with a center city for calculation, a suburban side, or a next ring for industry, and then a third ring for living comfortably in the country. Again, I'm using an American case. I don't know the French case well. I'm sorry, I'm just such an Americanist. And of course, gender relations. This is what it was like where I grew up. Mom dressed like a maid. All of us grooming my father before he went to the office. Okay. So this is the world that the hippies wanted to rebel against. This is the world they wanted an alternative to. In their view, though they overstated the case, in their view, this was what fascism looked like in America. They thought fascism was a family affair. Literally patriarchy gone haywire. In the era of miniaturization, interconnection, and platformization, we have been able to undercut those norms. How many of you are fathers who worked at home while also taking care of children during the pandemic? Well, not as many hands as I'd like to see, but okay, most of the men here, that's great, thank you, exactly, right? So suddenly, that role is entwined. How many of you are mothers who are home with kids and also doing your jobs on your computer? Okay, great. I see some men in the mix too, that's good. Yeah, exactly. My point is simply that when you can work at home, these roles can be challenged. And were challenged during the pandemic and are still being challenged today. So that was a dream that the hippies had. They had a dream of a kind of world of interconnected flexibility. And for folks who can move, for folks who can travel, that world is beautiful. My friends who work at Facebook but live in Colorado are very happy. They can code from a mountaintop. My friends who work for Starbucks are less happy. So this is an actual interface from Starbucks. Starbucks is a coffee company. I think it's here in France also, yes? Don't let them get any bigger. French cafes are worth fighting for. Just saying. Okay. So this is a dashboard. You can see this from their cell phones. This is a dashboard for managing their hours. Now note the language here. Starbucks workers are not workers, they're partners, as if they were on equal terms with the bosses. Ha! And look how free they are. They are free to set their own hours, unless the boss disagrees. They are free to work flexibly, unless their shop has other needs. They are free to negotiate their hours with someone who has the power over their paycheck. My point here is that flexibility matters very differently for different kinds of people. The countercultural dream of the integrated world is a dream that never took account of class. It never took account of working class life. And that's one of the challenges that we face today. How do we preserve the flexibility and the independence that technologies grant us without hurting people who have less advantage? Now, if you think this is only a working class problem, I urge you to go online after this talk, not during, and look up the word bossware. Bossware is a new thriving industry that is surveillance technology for employers who have employees working at home. Now, I was astonished when I was told about this and went to research it. Bosses can, given the proper technology, so if you have a laptop like I have a Mac laptop, I'm getting fast, aren't I? I have a Macintosh laptop with a camera and a microphone. And now my camera and my microphone come to me from my university, Stanford University. And when I got my computer, I asked the university, do you track my use of the computer? And the computer IT guy said, well, I can't talk about that. But let's just say that if you use BitTorrent, which is a downloading site for lots of high-powered big files, we will be at your office within the hour. Okay, that's just Stanford. I came from MIT. At MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they have a university policy of no tracking. Stanford does not share that policy. Okay. Now, I hope that Stanford isn't doing what bossware firms allow. Bossware firms allow bosses to control cameras, microphones, keystroke monitoring, all without the knowledge of the worker. So now, the clock from the factory floor is on your desk at home. Your boss can literally get a record, a printout, every day, anytime, of how many hours you've devoted to work processes. And if you go online and look at Bossware, you'll see their advertising copy is amazing. Is Bobby spending too much time on Facebook? Did Marie spend 3 hours Googling surfboards? You need to know these things as an employer, and our Bossware will let you. My point is that this is a surveillance regime that is enormously powerful. It starts going down, but I assure you it's available to Stanford, it's available to our employers, it's available to elite people as well. So as we negotiate the flexibility offered by computers, our challenge is to keep this kind of surveillance at bay. In the counterculture, the dream of mutually programming harmony was one in which we could watch one another, see what we needed, and help each other achieve that. We could be machines of loving grace to one another. But in this world, the world of bossware, some people have the machines and they don't have a lot of grace. The resulting flexibility is challenging all kinds of norms that we've inherited from the industrial era. Some of those norms, like our gender norms, I think are long overdue for a challenge. It's kind of wonderful to see that you don't have to live with women at home all fragile. And as a man, you don't have to be all strong going to the factory. There are other possibilities. But some of the things that are being challenged are very dear to our hearts. And one is quite simply the principle of equal pay for equal work. And here I'm drawing on the work of Veena Dubal, who's a scholar in the United States, also Zephyr Teachout, who is an attorney and a political leader in the United States. And they've done research that shows that the ability of digital media to track the behavior of workers allows employers to individualize pay. Now, let me slow this down. Here's the process. Track individual workers, see where they like to go, when they like to work, what they like to do. And the tracking can include their social media use, and if they have bossware, what they do at home. So we begin to get a portrait, and I start to notice that, oh, you like to work in the evenings. Okay, fine, you're an early evening driver. Huh, okay. And I know you like to get home by 9, and I know that you will work all night. And you're gonna both work in the same area. Now, as Uber, I can offer you a ride at a lower rate at 8:45 than you, because I know that you'll keep working, or whatever, right? I can individuate the pay practice. This is my point. We can now pay unequally, and workers have no way of knowing, A, that that's happening, or B, why it's happening. If digital media do not only provide flexibility and alternatives ways of living, which are very valuable, but also destroy the principle of equal pay for equal work, we have a real problem. Now, I think it's negotiable. I think we can figure this out. But this is a labor problem that needs work. The countercultural dream of everyone just voicing their needs and things all taking care of themselves, Elon Musk might think that works at Twitter, but it sure doesn't work for the Uber driver. By the way, let's just pause for a second. Thank you for being here instead of with Elon Musk. I mean, it's like a team rally. You know, I feel like, yes, go team. All right. So the question that I want to wrap with is, where do we go from here? There's going to be a lot of text in the next few slides, and I apologize for that coming in. In 1967, cybernetic utopians wanted to replace hierarchical institutions, governments, businesses, other things, with technology-enabled individual expression. They wanted to be able to take technologies developed by industrial America, repurpose them, put them on communes. Some of these technologies were steel for roofs, but other technologies were things like LSD. They could repurpose your consciousness, get you all in harmony together. Music, some of you, I look around this room, some of you are just way too young to know what it was like to enter the world of amplified music. Like, amplification was brand new when I was a kid. And I'll never forget when my parents got a home stereo with speakers big enough. I was like 7. I went and stood in front of those speakers and I could feel them in my body. That's the kind of technology that the counterculture celebrated and hoped to use to enable individual expression. Mutual surveillance. We would just watch each other like machines of loving grace, and we would live in a world in which home and workplace were together, and so in theory, better. That's the countercultural dream. Now, pieces of that dream look like they're here. We live in a world of mutual monitoring. We have individualized, technology-enabled expression. I can post on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok if I'm feeling twisted. We have flexible home-based employment at all levels of the economy. And we have a global revolution in gender relations that is entirely connected to the rise of post-industrial modes of labor. And those are really powerful changes. The question that I think we need to be paying attention to now in this space is, how do we lock in the benefits of this new flexibility for everyone? And I want to flag that I think this is a model for how we might be thinking about tech today. I've been in France 24 hours, and I've been bombarded with questions about AI and about what we should do about technology. And my answer is, AI is much less important than we think it is. And we can't do anything about technology as a whole. What we need to do is look at the places where technology intersects with our social lives, intersects with our politics, intersects with the way we want to live, and push back from there. So in this case, I've been looking at problems of labor, and that's where we want to push back. We have to stop imagining that technology can be treated as a whole thing, and we especially need to stop imagining that individual expression and the enhancement of individual expression is the essence of freedom. That's Elon Musk's idea. The enhancement, the amplification of individual expression produces a global society of individuals who are then very vulnerable to charismatic leaders, but also to anyone who can capture institutions and resources. I will go as far as to say, and I mean to provoke, the rise of radically individuated experience at scale is a gateway toward authoritarianism. It is not the gateway to democracy. It is the gateway toward authoritarianism. So what do we need to propel that? 2 things, both quite lively in France, which gives me endless cheer. 1, unions. We need to organize. We cannot fight these things alone. The tech world tells us that if you don't like the technology, you'll just leave, and that will be an incentive for the company to change. Bullshit. Just not true. Not true. There is nothing you individually can do to change Facebook. But as a union, you can change Facebook's labor practices. And as a state, a French state, you can regulate social media here in ways that change our practice there. And that's another reason that we need this. Now, our governments are flawed. Our legislatures are flawed. I saw what happened when Macron changed the retirement age. But I was also really cheered. Singing the Marseillaise in the French legislature? Yes. Representative democracy is an imperfect system, no question. But it is so much better than technology-enabled authoritarianism, technology-enabled individualism and charismatic leadership. Hyper-individualized societies with charismatic leaders produce fascism. That is not what we want to create. Elon Musk is not a Democrat. And to restrain his kind, we need to lean on, build, and empower the kinds of democratic institutions that we have, as flawed as they may be. So here's the irony. The best way to fix the dreams of 1967 in our experience is to embrace, work through, and sustain the political institutions that the commune people of 1967 eschewed. They didn't want those. They wanted to be different. They thought, I'll just go home, I'll get some technology, I'll drop acid, I'll be happy. Doesn't work. We need a world in which institutions help change our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. You prove again that you are an all island of critical thinking by your own, and if you push in that direction, I think Silicon Valley will expel you, and we will be forced to stay in France with our great pleasure. So now I have the pleasure to welcome Elon Musk for replying. No, I'm joking. Calm down, calm down. I have the pleasure to welcome and introduce Jen Schwady, who is associate professor at Sciences Po, and is definitely, and are definitely, he's definitely, sorry, you are definitely the best internet specialist. So replying to your brilliant presentation, and after that we have a Q&A session. So Jen, if you please.
Great.
This is such an honor. Like in my world, this is a big deal. I appreciate it a lot.
It's a big deal to have you here. Can everyone hear me all right? All right. So yes, I've been asked to give a few remarks, but in the interest of, what did you call it, interconnection, specifically with Fred Turner, who I know most of you, all of you have come to see. I will keep my remarks extraordinarily short. So in Olivier's very apt description of Fred, one thing you left out was how kind and nice this man is. So many years ago, Fred in many ways is why I went back to grad school. I had been a documentary filmmaker for a decade. Fred had been a journalist for a decade, so it wasn't just his work that was inspiring, but that I could go back to school as well. You know, he was very supportive, and you know, one of the things that struck me when I really started reading your work more in depth was I could tell that you had been a journalist, because not only are you a skilled theoretician, but also a very gifted writer, which is not always common with academics. And so when I went back to grad school, it was very good timing, because it was 2006, right? Right when your book came out, which in many ways is also really important year for other reasons. You know, Facebook was made available to the general public for the first time that year. Twitter was launched. There was, you know, just in a few years after that, of course, we had all the kind of utopian celebration around digital activism, Arab Spring, eventually Occupy Wall Street, et cetera. So that time period, I think, was really key and really taps into, I think, Fred's ability to do what Olivia said in terms of like, how do we really situate your work, because it really is history, but from a very strong theoretical perspective that is also very applicable to what was not only going on in 2006, but what's happening today. And, just as a note, so my first year at Berkeley, we were assigned your book, and it definitely generated in my media theory class the most discussion of any other book we had that year. So it's definitely been inspirational to me. But what I want to talk very briefly today is not what has changed, but what hasn't changed, and why the book and the arguments there are still so important. Because I think because we're in this, we've swung from the utopianism to a more dystopian discourse in the media and et cetera around digital technologies, I think it's important to look at this broader picture. And so I really appreciated you doing that today, as well as what is going on more broadly with some of these changes. And, as for me, over the course of my research on digital activism, I returned so much to your work in this, debate around horizontalism, right? That you point out in terms of the counterculture movement wanting to react against authoritarianism and how it was interpreted. So that's why it was interesting what you said about like how different people have interpreted your book, right? Is this idea that, this strong tethering of, the horizontalism inspired the technology, and really looking at what's actually happening. But one more story. So it wasn't just with my book, but my current project, I'm looking at kind of the tech startup scene in France and inequalities. And I've been doing a lot of interviews, and I did one in my office. I usually don't do that. And this person came in, he sat down, and he looked at my bookshelf, and he's like, "I've read that book, but in French," referring to your book, right? So, so it definitely has come up in more ways than one. So, I think despite the fact that we are in this more dystopian space, that, and you mentioned, a lot of the concepts, right? AI, disinformation, et cetera. But really, in many ways, the root power structures of what, that society that we're embedded in really haven't changed dramatically since then. There have been these pockets, and I think it's really important to return to that, because right now, with all of the discourse around Web3 and really moving toward more distributed control and a more democratic space, that I think we just need to remind ourselves that the founders, so-called, which we can debate who is the founder of the internet. Everyone always debates that. But if we look at, the image you had of the white, what we call nuclear family in the U.S., right? Very privileged, right? And so these people, whether the counterculture movement or other people who were embedded and at least get most of the attention around technology, were privileged white men. And so if we, and of course we had, the military, universities, et cetera, that they were embedded in. But if, there's often this sense of looking at, along with that, these villains, right? So Elon Musk has been mentioned right now, and I'm one of those people that had a Viva Tech ticket and was going to go see him, but
bless your soul.
Would rather see you. But right, that there's a sense that, if we could just get rid of Elon Musk, right? If we could, oh gosh, if he just hadn't taken over Twitter, if we could just get rid of, whatever, when people were so excited when Trump left, right? All of a sudden, everything was supposed to be better, right? That there's this idea that if we could just get rid of these individuals, right, these powerful people, we could just have our internet back, right? But who is we, and who actually had regular, consistent access, who was creating content, right? Who was able to go out and live in the countryside and be able to afford to do that whether it was COVID or during the 60s, right? So it's important, I think, to think about your work in that context, which I find really useful to really understand what was happening, right? And it's the same thing with who's able to go out to Burning Man, right? I don't know if people have read Fred's work on Burning Man. It's really great, and it's
a dirty job. Somebody had to go there.
Right, so you captured Burning Man very well, and its connection. But who are the people, right, that we see at Burning Man? It's, again, yes, there are some people of color, but it's mostly white privileged people that are able to do that. And if we really think as well, right? So we've been talking about Elon Musk's visit, right? So he went to go speak at Vivatech. Did anyone go to Vivatech this week? Anyone else? Nobody? 2 people? 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's a big tech conference in Paris right now. Right, and so if you go there, elsewhere, you see these signs about, that France has been part of revolutionary disruption since 1789, right? And this idea of disruption and the disruption that you talk about in your book, has been really key that we see in France, right? And there's a reason why I'm bringing this up, right? So in my research, you see these manifestos around revolutionary disruption, working together, sharing economy, et cetera, with huge incubators, with this new venture capital firm in France, right? That everyone is talking about this, but who are these people in terms of how democratic is that space, how democratic is this space, and what needs to shift in terms of that to really enable, if we want our internet back or if we want to create something new, having more diverse voices. So that what you were saying, Fred, really resonates with what I was thinking. And at the same time, while I do believe that your arguments in your book is very relevant today because of some universal ideas, it's still important to really think about local context, right? And so, and to understand that, it's important, any other scholars here, right, to do similar research on what's happening here in France or elsewhere in terms of generating, our understanding of technology, power, control worldwide, not just in Paris, here in France, or not just in Palo Alto, but elsewhere. And is there a different way to kind of view some of these ideas and theories as well? Just the last point I wanted to make was another thing I appreciate about your book that hasn't changed, if you really think about it, is the power of civil society, right? And that's really what you were talking about, which I think is so interesting, right? So you were you were talking to these people who had imagined this idea of horizontalism and without organizations, without this hierarchy, but the reality is that setting up a commune does take organization, right? The military and these universities were organized institutions that helped create the internet, right? Those of you who use the Minitel, how many people here? Come on, most everyone. Yeah, right? I've bought a bunch at MOOs because I wanted to keep them for future to study it, right? Right. So if we think about, come on, France had the internet first, right? Really, that it was government and corporate institutions that really created that, and yes, that is part of these organized structures, but just as important is really looking at civil society organizations. And when we say that, whether it's unions, as Fred mentioned, or some of these communal living, right, really thinking about civil society more broadly and not just this individualization, which is really limited to think that we all have this individual power. And I think that's one of the key things that your work has given us. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Gosh. This is kind of wonderful, but also kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like attending your own funeral.
Yeah,
I mean,
birthday, Fred. It's your birthday, so don't be shy.
Okay.
Actually, maybe you could say a few words about Jen comments, and
Sure.
then you could switch. To
Just
the
briefly,
Q&A.
horizontalism, the idea that we will all be freer if we are all equal, is nonsense. This is one of the legacies of the post-World War II era. Something that happened in America and also to some degree in France after World War II in intellectual circles was the belief that hierarchy itself was what fascism embodied. That Nazi fascism in particular was industrial society gone wrong, that fascism with an authoritarian leader was not a species of charismatic overthrow, but rather a kind of hierarchical, an exemplar of what a hierarchical society, bureaucracy gone mad, could become. I think that's nonsense. I'm somebody who's written an essay in defense of bureaucracy. Bureaucracies are what guarantee the equal distribution of resources across societies that would otherwise be unequal. If you have a society in which individuals act individually against one another, you have a dog-eat-dog world. And institutions are what keep us out of that world. Now, they need to be representative institutions without question. But I'm a Weberian. I believe with Max Weber that if we build institutions that represent the interests of those who otherwise have opposing interests and give us a context in which to negotiate those differences, we have a better society. I thought the communes were going to be an alternative to that. When I looked at the communes, what I found was rule by cool. You would enter these spaces and they had done away with rules, they had done away with bureaucracy, they had done away with hierarchy. They just kind of got high and hung out. And when they did that, the most charismatic leaders took over. And they were always men, and they were always of money. And that's the world that Elon Musk would like to bring us. And I think it's the wrong way to go. Now, I look forward to defending bureaucracy here in France.
Thank you, Fred. I
Thanks.
think we have already a question, but we have a second microphone.
Oh,
if
great.
I can
Oh, yeah,
keep
sorry.
it, because
Of course, yeah.
I know that you like to speak out loud, but you have two microphones here, so yes, please. So Amélie has a second one. Actually, I haven't mentioned it. Jen just published a book in French after the publication in English. The title of the book is L'illusion de la démocratie numérique, and the subtitle is Internet est-il de droite? So is Internet Republican or part of the right wing? What would you say to that as a first question?
I'd say that the internet as a whole isn't anything, but the idea of using technology to create a highly individuated, interlinked society in lieu of politics, instead of politics, is an authoritarian idea.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted you asked a very good question about Vivatech, and because I checked the program, and I was very surprised because they have no, they don't intend to speak about, to discuss democracy, civil society, and artificial intelligence. So I think you guys, you should do that, and you should suggest to organize this next year, because this is the reason why I'm not going there tomorrow, because I don't see the point, because they seem to all think the same way, in the same direction, which is very boring. I think they should be able to discuss with other people with different ideas.
But I think, thank you for the question and the point. I think one of the legacies of the technocratic world of the 40s and 50s is an imagination among technology developers that what they are doing is the foundation of democracy. And so it's not only unnecessary, but sort of just wrong to talk about democracy in political terms. I'm building Twitter. I'm creating a space for free speech. Free speech allows order to bubble up. Order is emergent in society, in this view, like it's emergent in computational worlds. You just put all the bits together and they make order. Now, of course, we know that's nonsense in the social world, but that's why I think it seems unnecessary to talk about democracy in the Vivatech world.
But I think they should be able to talk with people with different ideas.
So sometimes they are. I will say, so I live in Silicon Valley, and I will say that, I've never talked to Elon Musk, though Elon, if you're listening, I'm here for you. I have talked to other tech figures who are who you would know. and you can say a lot over dinner that you can't say publicly, and you can argue with people. I actually have been imported to dinners for the purpose of arguing with. It's a little bit like being the dinner, but I've actually found that to be a very valuable space to at least raise objections.
And you speak a lot about Elon Musk, but I think that he is a product of our society.
Yeah, I think this is one of Jen's points. I think that's exactly right, that we keep thinking that the individual is the problem. On the contrary, I would argue that the fantasy that individuals are the center of political life is the problem. But that also is a problem that extends to the left as well as the right. I mean, the left that I know has in America anyways, has stopped talking about class, it stopped talking about workers, and it talks almost exclusively about identity and the performance of self, which are exactly what the internet industries and the mass media industries would like it to do. That's how you claim power in a hyper-mediated world. But I want to see, and I know Jen has written about this and made strong cases, I mean, I want to see unions. I want to see aggressive, organized, institutional action.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to say that Martin Wolf, who I had the chance to interview not long ago, Martin Wolf, Financial Times, he has the same ideas as you.
Great,
He has the
good,
same ideas.
good.
Thank you. Do we have a
jump in,
second
please.
question? Actually, about the unions, you know that Silicon Valley has been so efficient to prevent them to rise.
Yeah,
So how do you see the situation? I mean, the
So
evolution
it's changing. Silicon Valley has aggressively pushed unions out and about, but there are dramatic efforts to create unions at the mid-level tech workers union. So Tech Workers United is working very hard for coders. There are other unions, particularly in the service industries, that are working. Stanford University's own graduate students had a vote on whether to unionize this week, and we'll find out in July whether it works. I'm very hopeful that it will.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you, Jen, and the other two people. Awesome. I have a provocative question then, based
Great.
on what you said about charismatic leaders. Would you say then that President Obama is just as dangerous as President Trump?
Great question. So no, but not for the reasons that you might suggest. So his charisma, I would argue, is itself as problematic as Trump's charisma. So I think on the charismatic grounds, yes, there. Where I think it's different is with their different understandings of law and the respect for law. So Obama clearly respects and tries to obey the law and the Constitution. Trump does not. But I think the charisma in both cases is dangerous. And I would argue, I would go farther as someone who voted for Obama to express my disappointment in the difference between the charismatic claims on the campaign trail and the relatively mundane policies of being in office.
Yeah, that's part of the problem too, is that when you build up hope, then afterwards, when that doesn't deliver, then...
Right, exactly. But that in turn creates more of a vacuum to be filled with more special people. Trump says, I failed, but I didn't fail. They booted me. You need me again. You need me more.
And just maybe a side question. I'm not sure if this is possible, but I may have to leave immediately after. Do you have contact information?
Sure. So I'm super easy to find, and please feel free to find me. I'm on the web. You just Google Fred Turner in Stanford. I'll pop right up. But I have an email, fturner@stanford.edu. And I do write back. If I haven't written back in 3 days, write again. I get a little bombed sometimes, but I try to answer every mail within 3 days. And I love being, so something that may not be clear to see is like French perspectives are very different than the ones I hear in Silicon Valley all day. It's very valuable to me and very refreshing to me to be in conversation with folks here.
Thank you.
Thanks, yep. I see a couple of questions in the back there. While the microphone's moving, also let me remind you that CNF Editions, my publisher, has been incredibly good about publishing the kinds of conversations that we're having here today. And they have a table out front. I'll be signing books later, but I really want to encourage you to engage with CNF. They are a great resource here in France that we don't really have the equivalent of in the United States. Some of us are working to get CNF books into the American market more. But there's a kind of critical discourse available in France thanks very largely to the work of CNF, and I want to just encourage you to get to know their books. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Great, hi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. In your presentation, you made a distinction between the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution regarding gender roles in particular, and you showed how much they have evolved. okay, it seems that actually the gap that existed between very classified roles have kind of been reduced. However, you didn't mention inequalities that have emerged because of the tech. And the reason I'm saying this is that I have in mind a book by Adrian Daube about Silicon Valley. You may know him because I guess he's...
I know. Keep going. Yep.
Okay. And I remember very much that he talks quite often about inequalities that have been generated by, in particular, platformization, where he argues that the people who produce contents are mainly female, mainly women, and this category of population is not valued, is not recognized, whereas the people who actually code these platforms are male, mostly, and these people are recognized, are valued, are said to be tech employees, and as such, they have the best salaries, they are integrated between in what we call the tech employees. So I would like to hear you about these.
Great. So I wish I had said everything that you just said, because I think you made the case. Within the industry, it's very clear that some roles are coded as male, some roles are coded as female. And I mean, I've been at dinners, this is again the dinner thing, I've been at dinners where senior tech leaders, males, have said to me, you know, Fred, women just aren't as fast as men on the coding. And
they still believe it.
They do believe it, and I haven't even said anything about race yet. Okay? Yeah, so these views are absolutely still there. So what I want to say is that the legacy of misogyny, the legacy of anti-female behavior, the legacy of racism, those things are totally alive. The stereotypes associated with those are still alive inside this industry as inside others. That's still true. They're not going to die out overnight. When I tell a more positive story, what I'm trying to point to is the really dramatic change in gender relations, for example, at the national level. Like, it's possible now to be somewhere on a spectrum of gender in a public way that was simply not possible 20 years ago. I've spent a lot of time inside Facebook's headquarters, and they have posters that say, take care of, and then they list all different kinds of people. Now, I have issues with that, because it's clear that they still do the kind of gender misappropriation that you're describing. But gosh, that's a start. When Pepsi sponsors a float in the Gay Pride Parade, I have mixed feelings about it. I'm like, oh, Pepsi, get out of there. But I'm also like, Pepsi, they would never have done that just 50 years ago. So it's a very mixed story, but you're absolutely right. The gender differences are
branding.
And my trip to France today is sponsored by. Just to be clear, it's not sponsored by. But I mean, I think your point is absolutely right. The fight goes on, and I'm sorry I didn't think to mention that. I saw another hand. Yeah, there it is, right there. Go for it. Yeah, you got it. And Jen, please jump in, and Sylvain, please jump in when it seems good.
I have two questions. One about utopia, because the first one is about the series Black Mirror. Do you know the series Black Mirror?
Oh, it's Black Mirror. Yes, yeah. I sure do. Yeah.
Okay, because you talk about the role of art and how the art can,
Yeah.
And my question is, what do you think about Black Mirror? Because it's a dystopic vision of technology, and did you think it can be a bundle for our society to use art to show the limit of technology? First question. Okay. And also, I'm asking something because technology and the utopia of technology is the only one that I know who are a utopia before and after, who become performative in reality. For example, today, post-croissance and degrowth utopia, it seems to be more difficult to pass from this utopia from reality than technology. Even if technology utopia are more individual and seems to be less necessary than post-croissance utopia. So
Okay, that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I'll come back to it. Repeat just in a microsecond your first question. Just remind me.
Black Mirror.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks. All right, so Black Mirror is a really interesting case. For folks who may not have seen it, Black Mirror is a show that has individual episodes of dystopian technological possibilities. When I talk to my friends, most of my friends in the tech industry who've seen Black Mirror, this is what they say. Cool. And let's just think about this for a minute, right? So you and I are focused on the dystopian outcomes, but sometimes my friends in engineering are focused on the amazing technology that produces. And this is one of the things that we need to work on inside the tech world, and this is something the McCord Institute is actually working on very, very aggressively. We need to develop an ethical sensibility inside the tech innovation world that says it's not about just making things that work. It's about making things that work for the good of people. And right now we're not there. So a show like Black Mirror may have exactly the opposite of the intended effect. In the same way that, so I've written, some you'll know and others don't maybe, that I've written a lot about Facebook's art collection. Facebook has a global art collection. They have a curator on every continent, including Antarctica. And but their art collection is very strange. It's not just like they collect art and buy it and put it on the wall. No, they hire artists to come to their walls and paint the art on the wall, so that their workers can see the art being made and imagine themselves as artists of code. What's even weirder is that the art tends to be street art related, so it's often very political. But it's cut off from the actual political world. It's just a sign now. So there's people of color all across the walls of Facebook. And if you spend time in there, it's just totally dissociated from actual communities of color. They're just symbols, signs. Now, remind me what Facebook does for a living? Oh, Facebook gathers up signs from the social world and repurposes them as identity markers for profit. Huh. So that's how art, I think, has been used there. And there's CNS has a very nice book called L'usage de l'art in Silicon Valley that I wrote, and I'm very proud of that. So yeah, scope that book out. But this, sponsored by. So that would be my first answer. I think the second question, if I understood it, is really a question about utopia and performance. And one of the promises of the counterculture and one of the promises of the early internet was that now finally we could be authentic in public. We could be who we were. And in fact, Facebook's recruiting materials for new employees say, come to Facebook, bring your whole self to work. And that was promised as a utopian good. And coming out of the closeted 1950s, you could see why that was appealing. And I see that it is very powerful. But it also creates and has created an obligation to perform your authenticity constantly. When I was at breakfast this morning and everyone took a picture of their food to put on Instagram, that was a performance. And it was a performance that destroyed what was otherwise, for me, an amazing moment of tasting butter. I mean, a real French croissant is like, that's like, oh my God. It's like God made butter and then put some flour on it. It's incredible, right? Try what? Oh, okay, great. Can't wait, right? But how am I going to focus on that experience if I'm busy doing my Instagram thing? And I think that's something we're beginning to experience. We're beginning to experience ourselves alienated from ourselves, because now it's not like the TV era where we just watch other people. Now we are constantly performing. It's very difficult to know where the show stops and reality begins. I do understand that in France you have a disconnection law. I wish we had that in the US. My boss can and does text me at 11 o'clock at night without any qualms. My university gave me a cell phone a couple of years after I started, and I thought, how lucky I am. My university bought me an iPhone. I feel so special. That weekend, my chair called to ask what I've been doing about a particular departmental problem. And the answer was having a weekend, but that's not an acceptable answer where I work. So yeah, thanks, great question, thanks.
I have also another question.
Okay, well, you get one more follow-up, now I got a crowd, keep going.
Okay, it's about cryptocurrency, because I think what you say about institution, it's for me cryptocurrency and this world of Bitcoin, and it's the perfect illustration of what you say, because it's people who believe that institutions are for the past, and they even can pass about faith or confidence between each other. So it's just a remark. That's
Yeah, blockchains do not replace nations. And what you see in the blockchain universe is that when you try to do just distributed work, you get a lot of hustlers in the mix very quickly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
I have one question. But talking about utopia, there is a term coined by Emily Chan with its Silicon Valley is a brotopia.
Ah, yes.
And we were thinking about translating this book, but it was not easy. So my question is about, in your book you said that there is two branches of the counterculture.
Yeah.
And why the New Left? Why the Black Panther Party? Why the Chicago 7? Why all these people that were part of the counterculture but not the new communalism? Why do they lost? Because we talk about only the internet as individual, right. But in between the 60s and the 90s, there was the TV, the explosion of TV, yep. TV all night, TV every time, TV every day, lots of TV channels. And all those people that come from the New Left, from the Black Panther Party, were not TV people. The other were. So I think that what you say about individual media just begin with charismatic, invited people on the broadcast media.
So I'm going to write you a book very close to those themes, and we'll talk about that later. I'm in the middle of a book on the 70s and 80s and television and the rise of identity politics, and that's I hope to have that done soon. The two strands of American political life, the domestic communalist, live your life to change your life, change politics, and the explicitly political, do politics to change politics, party politics, they have an entwined history. And I think that we are talking about the new communalists today because they embraced the engines of American society. They embraced commerce. They didn't turn away from it. They embraced consumer goods. They embraced the self as the site of change. All of these are the deepest American norms. America also has a tradition, and I think I would really like to hear Jen on this. America also has a tradition of organized political action on the left and unions, but those unions have been beat down over and over again. And as we leave the 1960s, the active political left, the new left in particular, had failed. They didn't stop the Vietnam War. They failed. They didn't stop the Vietnam War. They had very little to say to the veterans who returned and to the working classes who came home after that. Then we hit the early 80s, and feminism, an enormously powerful movement, tries to pass the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment for women. That goes down to defeat. They barely get Roe versus Wade passed, and now abortion rights are under assault in half of America. So I think, there's a couple answers. One answer is that the TV people embrace TV, without question. Another answer is that the political people get beat, and that's hard, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you for such a great talk. I want to return to your ending and the need for institutions.
Yep.
I would love to get your opinion. I think we hear a lot about kind of what legislatures are doing to regulate tech or not to regulate tech, whether the GDPR or the FTC in the US. How do you think unions are doing? So I know that Amazon warehouse workers, part of that unionization effort was rejection against some of the surveillance mechanisms. And more recently, the Writers Guild of America is on strike, and they have a really interesting clause about don't use AI to write, to do our jobs for us. But I was wondering, do you think that's enough? Do you think there's more? What could be supplemental?
I think we're living at a moment. Thank you for the question. I think we're living at a moment in which unions are newly resurgent as an option, and they're an option among a sector of society that never considered unions for themselves before. Particularly lower ranks of companies like Amazon and Facebook used to sort of make this promise that if you join our firm, you're sort of like everyone in the firm, including Jeff Bezos, right? And you can still see these ads for Amazon workers today. I joined Amazon, I was a warehouse worker, and I got an education, and now I'm a coder. And those ads are on TV now. So it's very difficult, but I think people are recognizing that unions are absolutely necessary. Now, unions are up against enormous forces. Amazon, Starbucks, multi-billion-dollar companies very good at destroying unions, with law firms devoted to that purpose. And it's both sad and encouraging to me. If you look at unions winning the 8-hour day, it took 120 years in the US. It took 120 years to win the 8-hour day for all workers, not just for some subsectors. I think we're in for a similarly long fight here. I think we've entered a post-industrial era in which digital media are absolutely central to everything we do, and we have not yet developed a series of union strategies adequate to that era, but we're working on it. Jen, I mean, you've written more about unions than I have. You know, yeah.
Again, I'm going to talk about the American perspective here, but right. So, in terms of that kind of historical context in the U.S. in particular, what happened was the trade union movement became really embedded in the Democratic Party and vice versa, and it, speaking of kind of hierarchy, became extraordinarily hierarchical, very top down, and didn't want to, for many decades, starting with when, they were kind of quote unquote comfortable for a little bit, and then when corporations started moving factories first to the US South and then overseas, all of a sudden, trade unions were like, oh, we're losing membership, what do we do? And people in the South and elsewhere who wanted solidarity, and people in the US, I'm talking about the American South, really wanted to kind of engage with some of these trade unions, but there was a lot of tension, right? Again, it really comes down to this question of power that relates to our broader question of discussing technology, and organizing groups that are more difficult, quote unquote, to organize, right? Because what was happening in the South and why they were going there is you had really weak labor laws. You have the Ku Klux Klan and other organizations that were called in when there was a union drive. We're not talking about the 20s or the 60s. We're talking about the 1990s. And so if we look then at, these so a lot of workers' movements said, okay, fine, like, you're not going to work with us, or they would send down these kind of white men trying to organize black women, etc. It didn't really work very well. And so people just started to organize on their own, right? And we see a lot of the effects of that, for example, in the state of Georgia, if anyone has followed politics, right? That really got involved in politics, union organizing. And if we look at tech right now, right, it's hard to organize. It was hard to organize in the South. It's hard to organize tech because of this distribution. People aren't showing up to a factory where everyone, you talked about kind of the communities that were developed at factories, right? So old school unionism was you'd hand out a leaflet. You'd stand at the factory gates and you'd hand flyers out. And you can't do that when people are working all over the world or in their own homes. And so, yeah, there needs to be different ways to think about organizing. At the same time, I think it's very dangerous to say, okay, we have these internet tools, let's just, build a social media presence and send out emails and, do things that won't really reach a lot of communities of people that maybe are afraid to post online. There's a lot of fear happening. I talk about that in my book, right? This challenge of, posting anything political and fear of reprisal and getting fired. Not to mention people have different skills and abilities and time. I mean, has anyone done social media management? It takes forever, right? Even if you're using that campaign. So really a combination, a hybrid of doing online and offline organizing. The successful campaigns have really done that. And then there have been a lot of successful union campaigns and political campaigns in the US in the very recent past that hardly use any digital tools whatsoever. So I think that's one of the dangerous things, though, is really trying to rely too much on technology.
I want to also really recommend Jen's book, which I've read in English, and on this question, it's superb. It's the best that's out there. I will also shamelessly self-promote. I have an article in the New York Times called, New York Times Magazine called "You Call This Flexible Work," where I try to propose what some of the principles of new union activity might be at the end of the piece. So I try to. I mean, I won't go. It'd be boring here, but it might be good for you. Great, thanks. And yeah, good. Thanks. Good. Great.
I think this one first.
Which one first? Oh.
Wait, Bob. I think you were first. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. What do you think of decentralized social media like Mastodon? Do you think it's a new utopia of an internet over which we could have control again?
Yeah, so the question is, what do I think of Mastodon and other decentralized platforms? I wish Mastodon was a new utopia. I think Mastodon is actually really clumsy and hard to use. It's like an archipelago. You join one island and then you may or may not get the ability to travel to the other islands. So I was really disappointed. I rushed there. As soon as Musk bought Twitter, I rushed to Mastodon and promptly felt like a dinosaur. So you know, I think what Mastodon points out is the incredible market power of early movers. So this is what I meant by platformization earlier. It's going to be very hard to dislodge Twitter, even though it's a terrible system now. Filled with right-wing nonsense, marketing nonsense, it's terrible. But it has that huge space. It'll be very difficult to dislodge. And I don't think that the radical distribution of the technological type that Mastodon is using is going to work. It requires too much expertise. It's too difficult. The barriers to entry are too high. So unless you get a very low barrier entry, and there are other people who are trying to compete with Twitter now with low barrier to entry systems, we'll see. I think Twitter has an almost unbeatable advantage.
I don't have any questions to ask. I only have a present to give you because during the pandemic I was in the countryside writing a novel on this digital world. I was studying at Sciences Po, the executive master of digital humanities. Here it is.
Oh wow, wonderful!
Don Quixote against the GAFAs. And the idea is it is a dystopia.
Great.
And I'm writing about right here Arthur Grandin fighting against not the GAFAs, but the Bodas, which is Bubble and not Google. Opal and not Apple, Logbook and not Facebook, and Abalone and not Amazon. So
wonderful. Merci beaucoup.
The third book is in French, so we can come back bragging in the plane saying, I'm reading French books.
Yeah, that's great.
That'll be awesome.
Thank you very much. That's great. You're going to give me an opportunity to be on the plane and be like,
I'm occupied in reading a French book.
Yeah, je suis désolé. I can't.
Sounds perfect to me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. What a nice gift. Thank you. Great. You're it. You're definitely it.
Hi, Fred. Thanks for another great presentation, and thanks to all the organizers as well. I wanted to go back to that second tech time period of working at home and talk about the palpable physical effects in downtown San Francisco right now.
Yeah, great.
BART is being deserted by its users. Westfield closed a few days ago. What's your take on that? Do you think, like, downtown, it's like the public space, public square can come back? What's the role of San Francisco City in it? What's the role of tech companies? How do you see it?
So let me just explain the situation for folks who aren't local. The San Francisco is simultaneously becoming more and more tech-centered. Technologies from Silicon Valley, which is just south of San Francisco, are moving up into the city. And the city's downtown is really struggling. So a large group of shops have left. The public transportation is failing. We have a huge homeless problem, an entire Tenderloin district devoted to homelessness. And one of the questions is the return to work at home driving this? I would argue that it's not. Actually, I think that commuting rates are very similar now to what they were before the pandemic. I think that what seems to be driving this is a perception among tech workers who work downtown that it's no longer safe to be there, it's no longer safe to hang out, and that strikes me as a reaction to inequality. It's now impossible or very difficult to be a well-paid, multi-$100,000 a year tech worker drifting past a group of people on the ground, filthy, smelly, hungry. And don't even start on fentanyl. So you don't, I think you might know, my daughter's a social worker, and we belong to Glide, which is a radical Methodist church in downtown San Francisco in the Tenderloin, and my daughter's first adult job was handing out needles in the Tenderloin. Yeah, So we're and I can go longer, but we're intimately connected to that world. Yeah. Sure. Great. I leave the microphone people for. And should we just take a fan moment? Should we all just get out our fans for a minute and just like, thank you. Great. Go for it.
Thank you. So, disclosure, I work at a tech startup.
Okay.
And I've been going to a few conferences these last months, and what I'm feeling is a big disconnect between the world that thinks about the internet and the social impacts of the internet and the world that is building these tools. And what I was thinking is, what are your thoughts about this? Like, what thoughts do you have on that? And maybe how can we conquer the in-betweenness that we have? Because honestly, last tech conference I was, where we were maybe 10 color people there, maybe we were 50 women, and there were 1,000 people there. And it's pretty shocking, but I think it's the same in academia. It's the same in France around elitism, but in both parties. So how can we go beyond that so we can communicate, because our priorities are not the same, our words are not the same, and that is creating an in-betweenness that make us going into different directions.
Great, thank you. There's actually two questions there. They're both really important. Let me start with the second one first, which is how do we in the tech industry and in academia embrace, celebrate, and learn from the full diversity of human beings on the planet? And that's something that at my university we're taking very, very seriously, and we're working very hard about it. When I joined my department 20 years ago, we were 11 white men and 1 man from India who identified as Caucasian. He was Brahmin. And sorry, I just dissed all the Brahmin Indians, sorry. But that was then. When I became chair, and with the help of my colleagues, we became a department that is 40% female, 35% scholars of color, and increasing in both those domains. So it requires intentional, aggressive action, and often by people who look like me, and because we have the authority to do it. So that's one step there. Within tech and within the university system in America, the situation is different than it is in Europe. I don't know the French academic system very well, but the German academic system I know very well, and that's a very male-centered, even anti-female world. Often women really struggle there. And I know, I can't think of, I mean, I'm sure there are some, I can't think of a single German scholar of color that I know, even though I work in areas where I should. So I think there's real, in my corner of American academia, that's not the case, and there's a tremendous concern to diversify. I spent some time at Facebook watching people come to work, which was really interesting. I sat in one of the doorways watching people come to work just to see what the racial distribution was, and it was actually very diverse. Maybe 40–45% people of color inside Facebook. Now, granted, that's Facebook's headquarters, and it's sort of an HQ space, but that diversity number doesn't really account for class difference, and so I don't know. It was just an interesting phenomenon. Remind me of your first question.
My question was, what were your thoughts around how we can approach the gap between the two worlds?
There's another kind of gap that you put your finger on, which is really important, which is the gap between those of us who think critically about the internet and technology and those of us who build it. And those are two different cultures right now. The culture of builders that I know is a culture in which I build cool things that do amazing things, and the world changes, and it's not really my responsibility to know how it's going to change. I just build the cool thing. And then there's folks like me who are like, yeah, the cool thing isn't so good, you know, and we look like complainers. What's missing here from my perspective are places of intersections that have to happen institutionally. My department has had a series of off-the-record dinners for tech leaders where we have these kinds of conversations. Those have been pretty effective. Other groups like Tristan Harris has been very active in doing similar kinds of work in the Valley. At Stanford, we're working very hard to train undergraduates in both computer science and critical ethics. The McCord Institute here is doing things like that. I think this is a generational problem, and one that's going to take a couple generations to solve, and it's going to require training people who are good enough at CS to be able to make the critique, but also good enough at the humanities and the social sciences to know why we need to make the critique. Those are the people we need to train, and that's my job day by day. Thanks.
So dinners are the new public management tool, which is a very French idea. I know now where you get your source of all
dude,
your
yeah.
But they're not 5-hour dinners.
No, they're not 5-hour dinners. Yes, that's
very
true.
quick dinner, 30 minutes dinner. Another question?
Yes, thank you very much for your talk.
Sure.
You partially already answered my question, but I'm sorry for going back into history, but I was interested in the knowledge and the visions that communities had about internet and utopian communication, and on the other side there was perhaps this critical academics who had a certain vision about this communities. So I was interested whether there was any links between those two ways of thinking. The one side the visions, and the other side perhaps the critical analytics on what was going on.
Okay, I'm going to repeat your question because it's a very valuable one. So the question is historically, and by historically now I'm going to assume we mean in the 80s and 70s, 80s, maybe early 90s. Was there a connection between the utopian visions of the internet and what it could become and emerging critical visions? When I started writing Counterculture to Cyberculture, there were no critical visions. There were literally one or two scholars. I mean, is that yeah, it's sort of shocking. And, just everyone agreed. Everyone agreed that, we had a scholar at Stanford who said, the New York Times will be dead in 5 years and it will be good for democracy. Well, I don't even know what to do with that, right? Everyone in my world was saying virtual communities are the new hope for society. I mean, it was universal. In my world, real critique starts around 2000 and then picks up steam a lot after the 2013 revelations of Edward Snowden. The Snowden revelations are what flip it. When I started teaching at Stanford in 2003, I used to get student evaluations that said, "Oh, Turner, he's interesting, but he needs to read the Apple website because he's not optimistic enough." Now I get evaluations that say, "Oh, Turner, he's interesting, but he's way too optimistic." And that's post-Snowden. Because I've taught the same class every year for 20 years, different readings. I can see the change, and it's really around the Snowden era. But critical discourse of the kind that we're having here is still remarkably rare. I would say that in the university worlds, the kind of folks who are sitting at this table, we're becoming more common, but we're not by any means central. So at Stanford, for example, we have the Human-Centered AI Initiative. I'm one of 2 humanists who participate regularly there, as far as I know. And that's a $300 million enterprise with buildings and staff and yeah. Oh, I don't know where the mic's going. It goes around and around. See, this feels a little like a commune. We pass the talking stick around,
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks to be here. And I have actually 2 questions, and I want to come back to another question about the decentralized platform.
Mm-hmm.
All these platforms are built on the web, and the web is decentralized. Internet is decentralized, and there is people that continue to use the web with this first utopia. I think about a personal website or just share code and free software. Even little software. So my question was, do you think it can be the counterculture of today?
No, not at all. Thank you for asking. No, deeply not at all. No, I think what you just described, the world of individual expressive sharing of small technologies, is the dominant culture today. Free software, the story of free software is an especially interesting one because it is on the one hand frequently produced by voluntary actors, but now those voluntary actors are given a day or 2 a week by their companies to produce it because it's very valuable. Apache servers run on open source software. So no, I don't. Where I think the counterculture lives today is in a very painful place. From my perspective, in America, the countercultures of today are the evangelical Christians. They are the ones who are pushing hard against the mainstream in ways that I don't respect and don't want to be a part of, but they are the ones saying, the world of highly individuated, highly flexible, gender diverse, multi-structured society that creative, absolutely creative in the way that we understand it. Yes, that society, in their view, is the problem, and what we need to do is return to a more limited view. I would argue that they are the insurgent culture at the moment, in the way that the left was in the 60s.
Yeah, but for example, about the free software culture, I'm agree with you. I also read the book of I don't know the name, Adrian Dubb.
Yeah, good.
He talked a lot about this.
Yep.
But for example, in France, there is also a beginning of some politics about that, and about the fact that For example, if you are in a company and you use a free software, for example, you use LibreOffice and not Word, you can ask to your boss to pay 5% of that he paid to have Microsoft Word to the LibreOffice.
What obliges the employer to pay that? Is that a French law?
It's an obligation, yeah. You can ask, but nobody...
It's not an obligation. It's an option. Okay.
It's if you ask your boss need have to pay.
Yeah. So this just even that question isn't really askable in an American context. Like I could never go to my boss and ask for 5% in that way. It would be just like because the idea of the civic good and supporting that, the presumption in most American firms, for-profit firms, is I support the good by making money. End of story. Yeah, and it's a horrible way to think. It didn't used to be that way in the States in the 50s, but it is now. Ah bon.
Merci.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I'm from California. I grew up in the Bay Area.
Great.
But I'm a writer also, and I study utopia. I spent 8
Cool.
years at the UN in New York, and I studied...
Which some might argue was a failed utopia.
Counterterrorism. I mean,
great.
What can I do with myself besides all these things? And so I'm trying to follow AI and laws related to that. And I saw recently that China is participating in this. I'm interested in hacking also. I don't hack. I'm interested in who's hacking. And so I'm also interested. I'm just going to put some cards on the table, and then you choose from. Good evening. Thank you. I arrived very late, but I listened to the whole thing.
Oh, bless your soul.
As
Thank
I
you.
was walking here.
I love that. Someone walking in Paris.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's so nice.
And so, gosh, what was I going to say? So there's the upcoming presidential election in the United States. The last time, there were all these rumblings and techie doings. I read some articles, maybe it was like a Wall Street Journal, I don't know, who explained everything that Jared Kushner was doing in terms of the manipulating. Let's see here. I'm interested in the AI. I'm interested in security overall, and Secretary General Antonio Guterres proposed that there's now, there should be, I think it will be accepted, an AI kind of tech security agency to participate with all the rest of the UN agencies.
Let me just start right there, because I think you've raised an issue.
My name is Joanna.
Joanna, hey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice
Hi.
to meet you. A pleasure. Yeah, a treat. Thank you very much. Let me just start there and say that the first thing we need to do about AI is stop calling it AI.
Okay. What do we call it?
It's not. We'll call it machine learning.
Okay.
Artificial intelligence is neither intelligent nor artificial. It's an industrial process conducted with electronic machinery on data sets that are gathered from our social world, also by electronic machinery. It's done by people for profit with interests. It's done in ways that are kept secret by law and by common consensus. And we can challenge all of those features of what this is. As long as we even use the language AI, we're buying into the marketing scheme of those who would tell us that this should be the center of our attention. Imagine the persuasive power of industry to gather all of this much. There's a lot of brain power in this room. Gather this brain power and have it all focused on their new device. That's very powerful. Let's all think about AI and not think about inequality, about climate change, about the ways that AI servers suck up energy, the way that cryptocurrency sucks up energy to make itself and hurts the planet while it does it. Those are the kinds of things that become hard to think when we think special replacement of humans. And so we need to really turn away from that. Machine learning is a species of social mining. We know what to do about mining. We've regulated oil before, we've regulated gas before. We know what happens when we have extraction industries that pollute our world. Social media, and to some degree AI much less, but to some degree, but certainly social media is an extraction industry that pollutes our social world. We know how to regulate those things so long as we stop imagining that they are special or outside or beyond the laws of industry in previous eras. Well, thank you. That's you and me, babe. Yeah, it's great. Go for it.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. I want to look back to your beginning and your introduction.
Great.
And you say, and maybe you started doing that here, that you wanted to say that nothing is as bad as it looks. Like you introduced that with a lot of optimism.
Yeah, then I went
since the beginning, we are coming down. So maybe that, because I'm not going to explain my perspective, but as you stated before, like technocritics are emerged in the last 10 years, getting a lot of traction too, getting a lot of business. And you can see in Silicon Valley, you can raise money as being a technocritics today.
Well, I wish I knew where to get that money.
Yeah,
I'd love to get that money. I get dinner, but that's it.
As you introduced just before, and that was my point, is technology as a world is now like kind of a scapegoat of a complex world. And how, to look back to a question about Obama, when would you prefer to live? What would be your birth of year? What would you present? Because I was born in the 80s. We had the mass media system. Like Berlusconi passed away last year. We all watched Successions, looking at that and say, okay, Rupert Murdoch is not a good boy too. So Elon Musk, is he the next good bad guy? And as you stated earlier, we know how to regulate it. We know how to regulate these things. We know that unions exist. We know how to organize. Maybe there was a lag in reaction of the public society on technology. But what is optimistic on your view? What is the good point on your view at the moment?
Let me address that. So first, I like the idea of lag quite a bit. I think that's exactly right. I think we have had a lag, and it's a lag that was actually sponsored by the marketing side of Silicon Valley. You know, when I was first handed a Macintosh computer at the office, the IT person who handed me this was a man. He took my hand, and he brought it down on top of the laptop and made me stroke the laptop. I know it sounds weird, right? But at the time, it seemed I know it's not just. It wasn't personal. It was about what. This is a perverse audience, I can tell. No, but what it was this machine was so beautiful, so special, that I should enjoy its beautiful surfaces. Now he would never do that, and it's fascinating. I don't know what time would be any better. I don't have a time that would be better. In my imagination, I have a place that would be better, but that's different. I think the optimistic side comes when I stop looking at tech as a whole and start looking at particular settings. So one of the things that I do, I grew up in a very rural area. I still fish a lot. I still, every summer I get in a canoe and I go to wilderness areas and I paddle. In those places, digital media are being used to monitor animal populations in ways that secure their survival. I think that's wonderful. We can see surveillance being used not in Bosware, but in the Arctic to show us what changes are happening. So I think those are just two examples. I could go down the list. But my point is that in local settings, technology can be very advantageous. And I think that's really important. What I want to do is focus our attention in this particular case on the legacy of a social vision attached to machines that may not belong properly attached to those machines. The machines could be different. The social vision I really want to challenge. But I am optimistic with particular uses of the technology. Anyone who's been to the dentist recently and had a digital scan of their mouths, which then sent the cavities to another dentist for review, and within an hour you have it all fixed, knows that technology can be valuable.
I don't have the same dentist, actually.
So ending with the dentist, you know.
Unfortunately, time is off, Fred, so I think it's time, once again, for thank you, Jen, thank you, Steven.
Thank you very much, team, very much.
I'm not sure that you're really optimistic, but I feel I agree
I'm
with
trying.
you, so we're fine. And now it's time to go out for signing books.
Yeah, very happy to sign books.
That will be a free job for you.
Yep,
so maybe
absolutely.
you could go unionize outside and we could all socialize. Thank you again.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate being here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great. Yeah, this kind of afternoon is what makes me love France.
Pardon. Oui, effectivement. Non, alors c'était à moitié une blague parce que effectivement Fred va signer des livres, mais il y a aussi un cocktail qui vous attend et un rafraîchissement. Voilà, à tout de suite.
Tout de suite, ok.